Hello, everybody. My name is Mary Pierre, and I'm your Vice President of PISA. So today we are really honored to have Dr. Miller and Dr. Stritch, who were willing to come to talk about the American election with us. So to start, I will introduce Dr. Stritch, which is a former professor at Bishop's University in the politics department. He obtained his PhD from Queen he's been focusing on American and Canadian public policy. He had taught classes such as the Introduction to American Politics, American Analysis on Public Policy. So we're really honored to have him today to discuss American election with us. We also have Dr. Miller, which has a PhD from the University of Michigan in Near Eastern Studies. He's been also teaching classes such as politics and religion and the religious right in the United States. So welcome to both of you. And thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this event with us.
Hi, everybody.
It's an honor. Thanks.
So first of all, especially this year, the American election has raised a lot of attention around, not just in America, but around the world. And we want to know a bit about what is your opinion about this year's election. So to start this discussion going, we were wondering, what do you think are the challenges that are at stake in this election this year, and what will be the influence of that in the future? Dr. Stritch or Dr. Miller, you can.
It's a very unusual election, obviously, thanks to a pandemic that has killed over 217,000 people. And along with that, we're in the middle of a recession as well that has resulted from it. And one of the things that's very different this year is that there's a huge increase in mail-in voting by mail. And at the same time, we have a president who is trying to undermine the legitimacy of that process. And I think what we can expect is that we will see from the Republicans a number of legal challenges to the process of mail-in voting and to individual ballots. The president, it's also a little unusual in that an incumbent president has refused to say that he will accept the result of the election if he loses and will step down. On top of that, we have the continued Russian interference in the American election that in 2016, after that election, there were 12 Russian operatives that were indicted following the Mueller investigation. We've also had an intensification, if that's possible, of the level of polarization and partisanship in the American electorate. The American electorate now is very extensively divided into warring camps. I think that's probably the right word. It's also an election that's taking place in the background of the Black Lives Matter protest movements against police assaults on members of the Black community, and with counter demonstrations by white supremacists and a certain amount of violence in the streets. And what also makes it a little different is that we are also right in the middle of a confirmation battle for a key Supreme Court justice position. And much as the Republican Party said you shouldn't do this during in an election year, they are actually doing it while people
election. Yeah.
So this is a strange times we're in, which is all of which kind of makes it a rather interesting election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add only a couple of other things. Andy has, Dr. Stritch, or I call him Andy, has enumerated it all wonderfully. there's the issue, and it picks up on his comment about the Supreme Court. There is a case before the court right now on the Affordable Care Act. And so in the middle of a pandemic, the Trump administration and a number of Republican governors are trying to gut the Affordable Care Act so that pre-existing conditions are no longer covered, even though they claim that Trump keeps saying, oh, I'm totally going to protect you. But about that, no, absolutely not. The Republicans have had no plan to replace the Affordable Care Act, even though they have tried on about 70 different occasions or something like that to defeat it. Now they've finally got a case before the Supreme Court. And if, as seems pretty obvious, they're going to be able to get Amy Coney Barrett onto the court, they will have a 6-3 conservative majority that is more or less hostile to the Affordable Care Act. One would think that perhaps Roberts, who saved it the last time it was before the Supreme Court, would vote with the 3 liberals now, the 3 progressive justices. Was 4, but sadly, Ruth Bader Ginsburg lost her battle with cancer. So there's that, and also you have.
It seems to be singularly bad timing on behalf of the Republicans, because they are bringing this case that is of significance to a large portion of the electorate, particularly regarding pre-existing conditions. And they're pursuing this right in the middle of an election campaign, and it's an issue of protecting healthcare that tends to play to the Democrats' advantage.
It has, but I think the Republicans have sort of seen the writing on the wall at this point. I think they've decided that, you know, as Ben Sass said in a telephone town hall a couple of days ago, there's a blue tsunami coming, very possibly. That's how he put it. You know, he warned of a Republican bloodbath, a blue tsunami. He absolutely decried Trump, which was remarkable. So what you see is that possibly the GOP is sort of trying to just sort of grab all of the loot they can before they have to leave the store in the hands of the Democrats. And one of the things is they've just been hostile to the Affordable Care Act ever since it was passed in 2010. For various reasons. One, it was done under a Democratic president. They absolutely loathed Obama. They don't like the idea, of course, of big government being able to accomplish anything, because when it does, as it often does, it puts the lie to their idea that government is part of the problem, not the solution. So yeah, I mean, if you look at everything the Republicans are pushing right now, all of it is, they're all losers. They're all losing issues, and yet they continue to push them. They're going to try to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. They're denying climate change. They're giving, at best, mixed messaging about mask wearing and physical distancing and so on, and all of it is playing to the Democrats.
I don't want to pour cold water on the idea that there will be a blue tsunami time, but I think people were, some of the pollsters at any rate, were predicting a similar sort of tsunami in 2016.
I take a little issue with that, but and I have some things to back me up on that. But for the moment, I'll leave what I was going to say at that.
Well, I think if you look at the polling data.
Yes. Which I've been looking at a lot.
Yeah. Well, essentially, national polling data is largely meaningless, because it's the election is not decided by who wins the popular vote nationally. Otherwise, we would have Hillary Clinton as president right now. But it's all about the winning of the electoral college votes in particular states, particularly the battleground states. Right. And of course, in 2016, the polls that predicted Clinton victories in key battleground states were dramatically wrong.
They were wrong.
They may have learned from mistakes of 2016, but pollsters say they've learned from the mistakes of the past every time they screw up. So we might want to take that with a pinch of salt. But if you look at the figures for key battleground states such as Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio.
Yeah.
The polling numbers for Biden this year are almost identical to those for Clinton at this stage in 2016. In all but Ohio in 2016, Clinton was ahead in the polls, but she lost all of them. In Michigan, Clinton at this point had a polling lead of 11 percentage points, but still lost. Biden currently has a lead in Michigan of 7 percentage points. So given that the polls have been wrong in the past, I don't think we can absolutely write Trump off at this stage, even though it looks as though his route to re-election may be somewhat difficult. One thing that has changed this time is that opinions have become more crystallized at an early stage. There are fewer undecideds in 2020 than there were in 2016. In 2016, as much as 20% of the electorate really did not decide until very late, and
they broke for Trump.
And by and large, the preponderance of late deciders went for Trump, and that kind of pushed him over the edge in some key states. This year, there are about half the number of undecideds that there were in 2016. And so the preferences from polling may be a little more solid than they were in 2016. But from just this morning's, the latest polls that I've looked at, the race in some states does seem to be tightening a bit. And Florida is one of them. Florida, of course, is a key state.
Okay, but there are 6, if Clinton, I've been playing with a New York Times interactive graphic for a couple of months now, and I have determined that assuming that all of the ones that are safe Democrat stay safe Democrat, which is a good bet, there is only 6 states that Biden needs to win. And then it doesn't matter whether he wins Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Georgia. So the 6 are Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Nevada, and New Hampshire. And according to this 270 website that I've been looking at, the one that is the lowest for Biden is Pennsylvania at 5.2%. And the highest is New Hampshire, Biden 9.8%. So he's ahead in all 6 of these states, and his lowest lead is 5.2 points.
Yeah, I think Biden's road to the White House can go in a number of different directions. With Trump, it's more limited. I mean, if Trump loses Florida, then it's extremely difficult.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And Florida may be one of the early states to report. Because of the extent of mail-in voting this year, we're probably not going to know the final outcome of the election on November the 3rd.
No.
That
unless it's so overwhelmingly obvious, right?
But there's a logic there that in 2016 there were roughly a quarter of the ballots were from mail-in voting. Anticipating this year that more than 50% of voters will vote by mail.
Right.
And in a number of states, those are going to take some time to count. Also, there tends to be a bias towards Democrats in mail-in voting, that Democrats use it more extensively than Republicans do.
Which turns into the blue
If you look at Florida, the absentee ballots have been cast so far, they break in favor of the Democrats, sort of 51% Democrat, about 29% Republican, and the rest for independent or other parties. Yeah. And what that means is that by November the 3rd, quite a proportion of Democratic supporters may have already voted by mail, which means that as the results come in from in-person voting on November the 3rd, there will be a bias or a skew towards Republicans.
Republicans.
And what may happen there is that as those in-person votes come in first, while we're still waiting for the mail-in votes to be counted up, that will show Trump in the lead or winning. And
He'll declare victory.
Trump will almost certainly declare victory.
Yeah, that's
I anticipate that the Republicans will then launch injunctions to stop the counting of mail-in ballots.
Right.
And that could result in things being tied up in the courts for quite a considerable period of time with all the appeals. And that's if there are no recounts as well. Right. And so the mail-in ballot process could be extensively delayed. And there's a deadline that we're up against. That deadline is December the 14th. That is the date at which by federal law, the Electoral College voters have to cast their votes for president and vice president.
Right.
Now, if the mail-in ballot process in a number of key states is held up in the courts, and the results from mail-ins are unclear or are still being disputed, then the states will have very little option but to award the Electoral College votes on the basis of the in-person voting, the popular vote in that state for president and vice president in person, which could well be skewed towards Republicans for the reasons that a lot of Democrats have voted by mail. Right. And most states have laws that say they have to give the Electoral College votes on the basis of the popular vote in that state. So we could have a situation where if the mail-in ballots are denied through the courts, then Trump could win the election through the disproportionate number of Republican in-person voters. And Republicans, I think, partly as a result of Trump's exhortations, are less afraid to go out in person in gathering in groups at polling stations, and
voters as well.
Well, so that we could see problems there with if this ends up in the courts and could end up in the Supreme Court.
Just one thing to add to that, though. 15 million people have already voted.
Yes,
which is 50 times more than 4 years ago or something like that.
Right. Just about, pretty much all of the states do not allow the counting of mail-in votes until after the polls have closed.
Right.
Many, I think 32 states do allow the pre-processing of ballots well in advance, which means that they can verify the signatures, they can open the envelopes that the ballot comes in, they can prepare the ballots for counting. Mm-hmm. Florida is one of those. Florida allows that to take place 22 days before the election. And so on the night of the election, those ballots will be ready for counting and would be counted automatically by machine. So Florida could actually be a fairly early one. Arizona, North Carolina, similarly.
Right.
Other states don't allow any processing until the day of the election. And there are some key states there. I think Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania don't.
The three that gave the election to Trump last time by 77,000 votes.
Exactly. And so we could be waiting a little while for those.
Yeah.
But I would say expect some legal battles. Both the Democrats and Republicans are lining up literally.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. The Democrats, I know particularly Democrats have basically deployed an army already. They're all set to fan out. So yeah. The only thing, of course, the Democrats have a lot more money right now. I mean, that's the thing. Biden is flush with cash, and the Trump campaign is running out of money. So I don't know how much the RNC has on hand.
There is a big advantage there.
Yeah, which is remarkable because Trump had a huge war chest, and they blew it all. They just blew it all in the first few months. Very poor decision making by the former campaign manager Brad Parscale, or Parscale, however you pronounce that. Mm-hmm. And since then, well, I don't know, since Biden has been getting huge infusions of cash, and that only increased when he chose Kamala Harris as his running mate, and increased again after the debate, quote unquote, the debate.
Well, of course, the Trump administration
and the Supreme Court issue as well.
So the Trump administration and their campaign have a well-earned reputation for being fairly chaotic, doing things on impulse and ad hoc. And it's not as though, from Donald Trump we can expect sort of well thought out meticulous planning.
No. And one other point about the polling. Yes, we'd be concerned about that, except for the fact that they seem to have corrected their mistakes in 2018 in the midterm elections. They had it about right in terms of the polling going into the election, in terms of what the final results were. The only issue here, of course, and it might have been the case as well in 2016, is that Trump wasn't on the ballot in 2018, and there are a number of people who may have been unwilling to say that they were Trump supporters when the pollsters got in touch with them, when they were surveyed. That may be the case again, even more so. So it's possible that there is this kind of tiny, silent, not majority, but minority anyway, out there of people who have been polled who are actually Trump supporters and haven't been willing to say it, which would mean that they're...
A number of pollsters and commentators have, I think, largely now dismissed that sort of shy Trump voter argument. That somehow that there were these people who, because of all the criticism of Donald Trump, were reluctant to state their preferences. And certainly from looking at some of Trump's past rallies, his supporters don't look too shy to me.
No, the ones who go to his rallies, certainly not. No, they will be quite willing to say Trump, as we've heard one or two of them say at.
What did happen with the polling in 2016 was that there was a pretty systematic and widespread underweighting of people without a college education.
Yes, and they seem to have taken that 2 years
That group tends to answer polling questions less frequently than those with higher levels of education. And in order to correct for that, pollsters try to give extra weight to particular groups that are underrepresented in their polling. They didn't give enough to those without college education, who turned out to be pretty decisive in swinging the election towards Trump. Yeah. So maybe they will have learned by that mistake this time, and maybe the polling numbers are more reliable, but we shall see.
Well, what's interesting in the upshot in the New York Times is Nate Cohen and his team there. They give what they have from the polling, and then they also say they have two other columns. If the polling was as off as it was in 2016, this is the number, and if the polling is as off as it was in 2012, this is the number. And it seems so. I don't know what happened in 2012. I guess the polling was also terrible in 2012 because the number seems to be even more skewed with the 2012 methodology. Maybe you know more about that, Andy. What happened in 2012 in the polling?
Well, I think the polls had a better predictive record in 2012 than they did in 2016.
Okay.
Obama had a more noticeable lead in many of those polls anyway, and they got the result right by and large. The big thing in 2016 was that they massively predicted that Clinton was going to win.
Right. Except it was interesting about that is they actually had it right in terms of the popular vote. That's what was so interesting. Going into the election, at least in the last few days before the election, it was about a 2% Clinton lead.
Yeah. And
nobody could believe that her blue wall in the Midwest was going to collapse. And in the end, she won by about 2% of the popular vote, 48 to 46%. So they had it right there. They didn't take into account the electoral college nearly as much as they needed to. And
the quality of polling at a national level is better than the quality of polling that exists in some states.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe there are even more polls this year than there were in 2016. But I've never seen such a proliferation of polls. Are there even more polling? I mean, there are dozens that come in each day.
Yeah.
And they range enormously. You know.
Different methodologies. Yeah.
You've got some saying that Biden is ahead by only 7% nationwide, and others saying he's ahead by 16%.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
As I said, I would probably be inclined to ignore the national polling and to focus on particular states.
Yeah.
And I think in Florida, the latest I saw, that Biden is supposedly have a lead of around 2.7%, which is
I got 2
close to being inside the mark.
just before going on 0.4. Yeah, sure. That's about where it is, and but I'm cheered by the fact that we don't need that. Biden doesn't need Florida particularly. Trump must have Florida, and he must have Ohio. I mean, no Republican president has ever won without Ohio, right? And at the moment, Trump has a 1.4% lead in Ohio, according to
Ohio will be difficult for Biden.
Oh, very much so. It always has been. I mean, the only one who took it, I guess, Obama took it in 2008. Is that right?
Yes.
And then he lost it in 2012. Is that right?
I'm not sure exactly. I can't remember exactly whether he carried Ohio in 2012.
But it's the most. It is the most right wing of those states. I mean, forget Indiana. Indiana's this strange outlier. Once upon a time, the seat of the Klan, the second Klan. Definitely much more right wing. But then of those 4 states that we always talk about, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, 5 rather, and Ohio. It's Ohio that's always the one that's the toughest nut to crack for the Democrats. Yeah. So maybe we should let our people speak.
It was really good. Actually, I just have a question. So we talked a lot about what would people people know kind of what to expect if Trump wins again. However, what will be restored in your opinion if Biden wins in terms of like social unrest, or what would you expect if Biden actually win over Trump?
A little more honesty in politics, I would think.
A little bit. Fewer than 20,000 lies in 4 years?
I think the fact checkers have clocked Trump at an average of 16 things that are false or misleading per.
Yeah.
So,
or per hour. It might be per hour. Yeah, 20,000.
So I think fact checking might be a little more extensive in the Biden administration.
That's right. Daniel Dale managed to find new work. One of the fact checkers. Yeah.
Yes. Well, other than that, I think we're going to have it will depend on whether or not the Democrats control the Senate. I don't think they would be capable of losing the House this year, but the Senate, I think, might be a closer call. But if the Democrats do control both chambers of Congress and the presidency, then I think you can see some things pushing for environmental policies, particularly in regard to climate change, a greater degree of emphasis on subsidies for renewable energy, cutting subsidies for fossil fuel industries, and a general emphasis there in switching over America towards a more sustainable renewable energy base. And Biden has targeted that for 2050. So over a number of years, this transition will take place. I think you can also expect to see a bigger push on healthcare, particularly with the introduction that Biden has made a part of his platform, the introduction of a public insurance option to compete with and against the private insurance companies. Depending on what happens with the Supreme Court, well, I think certainly with the Democrats control the Senate and Biden's in the White House, you will see more federal judges at lower levels being appointed. perhaps, unfortunately, that the federal bench has become highly politicized now, though perhaps you could argue it always has been. So I think those are some key areas. You can see a increase in taxes for those at the upper level income levels. And certainly you're going to see a change in the demeanor of American politics. I don't think you're going to have the same level of politicization of the bureaucracy, particularly agencies such as the Justice Department or the State Department, which Trump seems to have been keen on using as a way of attacking and criminalizing his political enemies, trying to.
Yeah.
So maybe a little more civil politics. I think also, and it kind of affects the way the whole issue of Supreme Court packing, is that one of the things that Trump has done is not only to ride roughshod over some of the laws and rules of American politics, but also over the norms and conventions. And one of the things that has been conventionally accepted, it was a federal law that was passed in 1869, is that there should be 9 Supreme Court justices. And that has been pretty well accepted, apart from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's attempt in 1937, following a huge election victory, to stack the Supreme Court, to increase the numbers to 15, because the Supreme Court at that point had been declaring some aspects of the New Deal unconstitutional. And FDR wanted to get around that. He did back off from that, but what it did was to persuade this one member of the Supreme Court to switch their position. It became known as the switch in time that saved 9. And as a result of that, more the New Deal policies went through, and the Franklin Delano Roosevelt backed off from the court stacking plan. I think it would be wise for Biden to do that too. I would like to, I think if he tries to do that, it will consume up too much political capital from his agenda, and will not only produce to some extent a constitutional crisis, but it will also set a precedent for any subsequent Republican administration to basically do the same thing again in the opposite direction. I don't think that would be a good thing for American politics. However, the threat that it might happen may act as a spur to persuading some members of the current Supreme Court to adopt positions that are perhaps not as extreme as they might otherwise have done. So anyway, but that's kind of speculative there as to what might happen.
And Biden said last night in his town hall that he will make it clear before the election what his position is on the Supreme Court. Now, personally, I believe he should put 2 more justices on the Supreme Court, because you can argue that at least 2 of the 3 justices that Trump has appointed are illegitimate. The first one, Neil Gorsuch, is sitting in Merrick Garland's seat. The Republicans refused to give a hearing to Merrick Garland 9 months before the election with Obama as president. And then they went ahead and completely just in breathtaking hypocrisy, they've gone ahead and with Ginsburg a week after she's died, they've already appointed, nominated Amy Coney Barrett. And their argument is, yes, but we control the Senate this time and the presidency, so it's different. No. The Senate's rule was always advice and consent, and Mitch McConnell was completely illegitimate. One could say that he didn't violate the Constitution, but it was the dirtiest of tricks. to
Yep,
not.
I agree with you. It was dirty politics. It was
Dirty
power
politics.
politics
Okay, so that's the first one.
and
So,
hypocritical. But
so you got Gorsuch sitting in Merrick Garland's seat. You got Amy Coney Barrett, who should not be rammed through onto the Supreme Court before this election, given what the Republicans did with, in the case of Garland. One could say that Kavanaugh is also not a legitimate justice in the sense that Trump's election wasn't legitimate. I refuse to call him President Trump. I don't know if any of my students have ever noticed, but I never used the word president in front of
I think that's a dangerous route to go there, Daniel, to question the legitimacy of.
I question the legitimacy of it because the Electoral College is undemocratic. To the nth degree, the Electoral College is undemocratic. According to Nate Silver, okay, of the 538, with a 2 to 3 point lead, if Biden has a 2 to 3 point lead in the popular vote, he only has a 46% chance of winning the election. 2 to 3 point lead, only 46%. That is what Clinton had, she lost. It is only when he gets over 3 to 3.5 points that then he has an actual, more chance of winning the actual presidential.
Yeah, certainly, it's hard to accept that the person who wins the most votes nationally doesn't become president, but it's happened at several points in America.
Well, yeah, the Republicans have done it, have won the popular vote once in the past 6 elections, and yet they have had more years in the presidency than the Democrats.
But what you also have to appreciate is that America is not a unitary system. It was put together as a federal system. And the votes in each of the states, the person who wins the popure vote in each state gets
I know how it works.
All of the electoral college votes.
It's enormously
There are many
undemocratic.
attempts to reform the electoral college, but it is part of the American Constitution. And in terms of legitimacy, I think that
it was created to buttress slavery.
Yeah, well, once you question the legitimacy of a president who is elected according to the constitutional rules, then you're opening quite a can of worms there for any president to be challenged. And one thing that concerns me about American politics these days is the extent to which there is a very great polarization between different camps based on ideology and partisanship, and people living in their own media bubbles and refusing to accept the legitimacy of a process if they happen to lose from it, which is exactly what Trump is doing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the Democrats should allow Trump's bad behavior to become a role model.
No, but on the other hand, the Democrats should stop bringing a knife to a gunfight. The Republicans.
I think the Democrats are quite capable of fighting dirty too.
But no, the Republicans. There's a huge skew towards the dirty tricks that the Republicans have managed to pull off in the past few decades versus what the Democrats have done, and that's why I think that it would be totally legitimate for Biden to put 2 more Supreme Court justices onto the court and make Roberts the swing justice again, which is already not even good for the, I mean, what is it? The Democrats constantly get more votes by millions, and yet the Republicans control the presidency and they control the Senate. The Republican Senate majority of 53 seats represents 50 million fewer Americans than the Democrats' minority of 47 seats.
Again, put together in the American Constitution from the very beginning as a compromise between big states and small states, where the House of Representatives is done on the basis of the population and largest
but it's
number
not democratic.
The
It's
Senate
not democratic.
has, each state has 2 seats in the Senate. Vermont, with 650,000 people, has 2 senators. And California with getting up 50 million is about
40 million.
has also 2 seats. So
they
they had to do that, otherwise the American Constitution would not have been ratified.
No, but this is the thing. The thing that makes me so frustrated is when people like Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Kayleigh McEnany talk about the will of the American people. And the American people made their choice in 2016, and therefore they support everything that Trump does. 3 million, 2.8 million fewer people voted for Trump than for Clinton. So you tell me what the American people decided in 2016. And when they say that, we control the Senate, and you control the Senate with 15 million fewer votes than the Democrats with their minority. It's all garbage. It's absolute garbage. And the Republicans play this hypocritical game over and over, talking about the will of the American people when they have fewer votes for the presidency and fewer votes by far for the Senate. So for the Republicans to talk about democracy is just breathtakingly hypocritical.
One of the things
I get more excited about in these discussions than Andy does.
Well, in terms of practicalities of what can be done, and there have been certainly many attempts to change the electoral college system, all of which has failed over many, many, many decades. But I think one of the things that can be done is a move to end the filibuster in the Senate, which is a mechanism that allows a minority party in the Senate to hold up or block legislation from the majority. And it was something that was a big issue in 2010 with Obamacare. At that point, the Democrats had 60 seats in the Senate, just enough to break a filibuster, but it was a close-run thing. Yeah. And it's really just a matter of Senate rules and the allowing, if you're concerned about democracy, allowing the party that is in the minority in the Senate to essentially have a veto over significant areas of legislation seems to me something that, in a practical sense, could be changed for the benefit of greater democracy. Obviously, it's a double-edged sword. It would cut both ways, depending on which party had control of the Senate. Right. But I think that is something that might also help to break the gridlock of American politics. And I think there's a lot of cynicism about American politics from the public about not being able to do anything, and that we vote for somebody and they get elected, but then they can't do it because the system is gridlocked. And American politics has a lot of points.
Executive orders.
Yeah, there are lots. I mean, a lot of ducks have to be got in line to get anything done in America. And one of the things that I think is obstructive in that is the filibuster in the Senate, which used to be used very, very rarely, but nowadays has become commonplace.
And in fact, it doesn't even have to be a filibuster. It can just be a threat to filibuster.
Yes.
It's just sort of gone. They've just gone. The idea is like, yeah, it's just become a ritual. You don't even have to actually do Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and stand and command the floor for days and whatever. You can just say, I intend to filibuster, and that becomes a filibuster.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about like domestic issues in the American politics and all the challenges for America specifically. But it seems like in the debate, and especially in this election, there was less attention about international issues. So what is your what you expect about foreign policy for either like Trump or Biden, like the fact that it was not a big part of the debate as it was, example, in 2012, if I'm not wrong. I think there was Afghanistan that was bring up multiple times during the debate. And this year we don't see that often. They talked a little about the Russian interference, but it's mainly foreign policy that are that imply domestic. So what is your what would be your explanation of why there's international issues are not brought?
I think you're absolutely right that foreign policy issues seem to be very much on the back burner this time. If you look at Biden's website, it doesn't mention very much about foreign policy at all. A lot of foreign policy tends to be reactive to events that occur around the world. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, in terms of what do you do about Afghanistan? Should American troops be withdrawn? And various other arenas around the world. I would expect if Biden is elected that there would be a harder line towards Russia, particularly in regard to electoral interference and Putin's propensity for poisoning his political enemies, which may entail some consequences. I think more so from Biden than would from Trump. How relations with China might play out is another matter. Trump tends to blow hot and cold on China. He seems to have quite an admiration for President Xi or any
dictator,
authoritarian dictator. Yes, and China certainly is becoming more authoritarian and pushing its weight around more. And we can see that in places like Hong Kong, but also Taiwan and various other places around the world. So perhaps Biden would take a bigger stance there. I don't know. It's a little unclear because the issue has not really been front and center of this electoral debate.
There's the thing is that both candidates know very well that for the most part, American elections, presidential elections, don't hinge on foreign policy. They hinge on the domestic and particularly the economy, which is why, sadly, there was a thought that Trump was on his way to very possible re-election if the economy had not tanked.
Yes, quite conceivably.
Which is an enormous indictment of that country. When I think about it, I mean that is just shocking, considering that Trump has ripped up agreements, he's alienated allies, he's mocked allies, he's cozied up to dictators. His best friends are authoritarians. He wants to be one himself. He has made an absolute mockery of American involvement and stewardship and arbitration in the Middle East. I mean, that's going to take.
I think we just have to accept that America is a more conservative, right-wing country than Canada is.
Oh, it is. That is for certain. We knew that, except for the fact that 90% or 70% or whatever it is actually support the idea of gun control, but you've got the NRA that somehow manages to keep a stranglehold on policy there. So there was something interesting has happened with the China situation. Just about a week ago, China gave consular access to the two Michaels, the Canadians who they're holding in retaliation for Canada's holding Meng Wanzhou for possible extradition to the United States. Now, I think that's very interesting that after months and months and months and months, the Chinese agree to let Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor speak to consular officials. That tells me, I think anyway, that the Chinese have decided that Trump is on his way out and that they may be able to make a deal with Biden. And this is the first step towards that, is to allow the two Michaels to actually have a consular access.
Yeah, that may well be true.
Chinese, yeah, I think they've made they've signaled that they believe that Biden will be president. The thing about the Middle East, I mean, it's so disturbing what that Trump administration has done, and it's for three reasons. They absolutely loathe Iran. Okay, and of course, since it was Obama that entered into the nuclear agreement with Iran, Trump had to rip that up. But he has a number of cabinet people, like for example Mike Pompeo, who absolutely loathe Iran, and part of this has to do with their apocalypticism, their idea that these people are evangelicals and they believe that Iran is a satanic force. In a cosmic way. Then I
have a hard time seeing Iran as a force for good in the world.
Yes. Well, I mean, I do as well. Iran is not a force for good in the world, but Saudi Arabia is no more of a force for good in the world.
I would agree
And
with
yet the Trump administration has put its thumb completely on the scale for Saudi Arabia rather than for Iran. So that's one thing. And then, of course, there's Israel, right? I mean, they're doing Israel no favors with what they've been doing. I mean, that entire, the two-state solution is on life support at this point. The Palestinians are going to find it very hard to trust the United States as an honest broker going forward. It may happen that Biden will be able to sort of restore some trust there, but it's absolutely ridiculous how the United States under the Trump administration has treated the Israeli-Palestinian situation. And then there's the third thing. I think that in general, Trump just doesn't like Muslims much. You may have noticed. I mean, everything's transactional for him, though. So he will use Saudi Arabia and he'll use those Muslims because he can make use of them and they will in turn make use of him. But that's another thing. The Palestinians are for the most part Muslims. And this group of leaders in the United States, they just don't like Muslims. So I think you've got three things there. Also, of course, the United States, the Trump administration is as beholden as any government ever has been, administration has ever been, to the evangelicals, the conservative evangelicals. A large part of what they're doing in the Middle East, and particularly with Israel, has to do with pleasing Trump's evangelical base. It doesn't have to do with pleasing the Jews. The Jews are negligible in terms of the conservative Jews that vote in the United States. Okay, he's not doing this for the Israelis so much as he's doing it for the conservative evangelicals who see Israel as a very important part of their apocalyptic roadmap. So
I think one of the things
yeah.
that plays to Trump's advantage in foreign policy, particularly if one looks at the Middle East or in regard to relations with North Korea, is that previous presidents and previous administrations have set the bar pretty low in terms of getting any sort of solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or indeed of trying to prevent North Korea from becoming a nuclear state, which has failed. And so perhaps a new approach to those things is warranted, given that previous presidents of all parties have had quite a record of failure in terms of trying to bring about any resolution to that, perhaps with the exception of Jimmy Carter. But what the future holds there, we don't know. Certainly, relations between Israel and some of its Arab neighbors seem to have improved.
There were backdoor dealings, back channel dealings with the United Arab Emirates for years. This is nothing. This is nothing except for the fact that Saudi Arabia must have given their assent to the Bahrain deal. But no, this really is pretty negligible that the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have made, economic agreements with Israel. So
yeah, and in that whole arena, the items of good news are few and far between. So perhaps,
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean that's the thing, and I think Americans are less and less concerned about Afghanistan and Iraq. The caliphate is gone now, the ISIS caliphate. So I think Americans have sort of turned their attention away from ISIS. They want to wash their hands of Afghanistan at this point, which is very sad because I think now there probably will be this deal with the Taliban. The Taliban will come back into power to some extent. They'll have some measure of power, and women's rights and dignities will be reversed in Afghanistan. It's very sad because, $3 trillion or something like that? Or is that Iraq? I can't remember. Anyway, they've spent huge amount of blood and treasure. And in the end, for what?
Plenty of precedents for doing that.
Yeah, I know. And Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. So it looks like they've defeated both superpowers at this now. They defeated both the Soviet Union and now the United States.
I think one thing that Biden might do differently in foreign policy is in regard to relations with the allies, particularly in respect for and support for NATO
Oh, yes.
as a bulwark against Russia. I
Yeah.
think I don't know, what it is that is inducing Trump to be so sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. Speculation that Russia has something on him, but it may be just his personality. But I think Biden would take a rather different approach in terms of shoring up support from America's allies in foreign policy, and certainly informing them more about American decisions, which Trump has just tended to fly off the handle without telling anyone what he's doing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that I think we might see a difference there. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here in what the Biden administration would do, given that the election results are still up in the air, even though Nate Silver's 538 only gives Trump a 14% chance of winning the election. But,
right.
pollsters have, as I said, been dramatically wrong before. So, however, I think that there are some reasons why Biden has a greater advantage than Clinton did, and that there's some factors that are more likely to bring about a Biden victory this time, as opposed to Clinton's efforts in 2016. One of them is that Joe Biden personally is more popular than Clinton was. That in 2016, Donald Trump had some enormous negative figures. That the balance between people who saw him favorably and unfavorably was like -21. But Clinton also had some pretty serious negatives too. Like the balance between her unfavorable and favorable ratings was -12.6. That the 12.6 percentage point difference in favor of those who saw her in an unfavorable light. So she had some big negatives there. This time in 2020, Trump's negatives are still there. They're not as much as they were in 2016. They're about 11.5%. But Biden is actually on the positive side of the ledger, that more people see him favorably by about 2 percentage points.
That's right.
And so that is a 14.5 percentage point difference between him and Clinton in terms of how they were regarded. So in addition to that, I think we have what you might call the Bernie factor. That for Bernie supporters of Bernie Sanders who voted for him in the primaries against Clinton in 2016, 12% of those Sanders supporters actually voted for Trump in the general election. Roughly another 10% voted for third parties or did not vote. So that's a sizable chunk of the electorate there who did not vote for Hillary Clinton and were instrumental in getting Trump elected. And I think a big part of the reason there was that everybody, including those voters, assumed that Clinton was going to win anyway.
Yeah, that's and right.
So just the Bernie or bust crowd who had been for a year long in an intense and bitter fight with Hillary Clinton, and a number of them who really despised her were not going to go and vote for her. And they thought, well, okay, Trump's going to get defeated anyway.
Right.
So we can keep
my nose
clear and not have to go and vote for Hillary Clinton. After that result came in 2016, I think the Democratic Party and its progressive wing got PTSD, the post-Trump stress disorder.
Yeah, right.
I don't think they're going to make the same mistake again. So I think Bernie is much more on board this time. Here,
totally on board.
Bernie and Joe Biden are personal friends.
They are.
There's not so much animosity there as there was with Clinton. And so I think those folk are probably going to turn out more for Biden than they did for Clinton.
And the third party candidates are eligible.
There's another factor here that's besides the pandemic and the recession. Well, the pandemic and the recession have big impacts, and Americans are very unhappy now. And when Americans are, I think, survey I last saw said that the Americans are the unhappiest they have been in 50 years. And when voters are unhappy for whatever reason, never mind, no matter who is to blame, they tend to take it out on incumbent politicians, particularly presidents. Yeah. And so that, I think, is going to hurt Trump and play in favor of Biden. And of course, one of Donald Trump's main campaign strategies has been enormous public rallies, large numbers of people to whip up enthusiasm and generally so that he can bask in the adulation and whip up support that way. But of course, with COVID, he hasn't been able to do that. And although he's been trying to hold some rallies in airport hangars, it's nowhere near the level that it was in 2016. So I think one of Trump's main electoral strategies has been undermined there, on top of which he's dealing with a pandemic and a recession that he, as Daniel rightly said, last year he was looking as though he might cruise to re-election on the basis of a very strong economy. Now the economy is in the tank, and people are worried about the virus. This has negatively affected Donald Trump. And I think, as I said, the polling numbers may be a little more solid this time because there are fewer undecideds. But full disclosure, I predicted that Hillary Clinton would win in 2016. So we'd be wrong this time.
Yeah, I said at the time after that, once Trump won, that I was never going to make predictions again, but I broke my rule, and I'm predicting Biden wins. The two other things, just quickly, that the third-party candidates are negligible this time around. I can't even name one who's prominent, even though I see that in some states there's 8%, 9%, 10% still that aren't for Trump or Biden, and those are obviously third-party candidates, but I don't know exactly who they are. Whereas you could name some of them in 2016, in particular Jill Stein of the Green Party, I believe it was. What was the other thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, Biden is a white guy. The misogyny isn't there this time around. Clinton lost in no small measure due to the fact that Americans are not ready for a woman as president. They weren't in 2016. She went up against the personification of the male id and lost. And Biden is a grandfatherly white guy. It's not for nothing.
He has a vice president who is a...
Yes, he does, but she's the vice president, right? And even though he is 77 years old or whatever...
And looks as though he might not make it to Inauguration Day.
They have moved a little bit since, I think there's sort of been a shock, and the Me Too movement has helped women as well. So that I think there has been something of a sea change, I hope, in the United States with respect to that. And I fully expect to see Kamala Harris, very possibly anyway, as the first woman president of the United States, maybe as early as 2024. I don't really see Biden wanting to keep the job for more than about 4 years. I think he says, he sees himself as sort of a bridge to the next generation. And I think he should be. I'm not sure that he should keep the job for 8 years. Although the problem is, of course, that as soon as you switch horses in midstream, then there's a possibility the Republicans sneak in the back door.
Yes, this is all a little ways down the road. We should see what happens there. With given Biden's age, he does look a bit of a placeholder. But.
Yeah, right. I mean, Peter Beinart wrote an article a few months ago about the difference between Clinton and Biden comes down more than anything else to the fact that he's a man. He's a white man. And it's not for nothing that Trump saw Biden as being his biggest possible problem, his biggest, his worst opponent in a general election, and tried to undermine him through getting the Ukraine government to admit to say that they were starting an investigation against Biden.
Yeah, I think to some extent Clinton was seen as the bearer of a number of politically correct,
Right.
gender-oriented issues that significant sections of the American population were not comfortable with.
Whereas Biden is like Mr. Moderate, Mr. Middle of the Road. He has assembled an absolutely overwhelming coalition. And part of the coalition, remarkably, of course, and this is something that the students, I think, should be aware of, is that there's never been this much Republican, quote unquote, opposition to a Republican presidential candidate. The Democrats have always been known for being fractious, and sort of there's always been this faction, often a faction that's working against the actual nominee and that sort of thing. Democrats have run against incumbent presidents in primaries and that sort of thing. But this time you have the Republican Party in absolute disarray. You've got this group called the Lincoln Project, which is disaffected Republicans who don't even call themselves Republicans anymore, right? And these are guys, strategists who worked for former Republican presidents and also nominees like George W. Bush, Romney. So you got people like Steve Schmidt and Stuart Stevens, and until very recently anyway, George Conway III, who's the husband of Kellyanne Conway, who was Trump's spokesperson. And they are putting out, first of all, they're well-funded, and second of all, they are putting out the most scathing advertising.
Some of their ads, yes.
It is remarkable.
Essentially, they're the old guard of the Republican Party.
Yeah,
And in 2016, in the course of the primaries and the run-up to the general election, a lot of speculation that Trump was tearing the Republican Party apart, and that how was the Republican Party going to recover from this? Well, what Trump did was really to unite the Republican Party behind him. It's become, to a large extent, the Trump Party right now.
It's a personality cult.
The survival of Republican representatives and senators has depended upon Trump's support, and they did not want to get primaried by Trump endorsing their opponents, and so they all came in line because of Trump's pretty solid control of his base, which he still has.
Yes.
And I think you can see that in the debates or on the town halls that Trump speaks mostly to his base. He has
he hasn't tried. He hasn't tried at all. He has not tried from day one of his presidency. Has not tried to expand his coalition.
Right.
No, and he's lost huge numbers of white suburban women, for example. And this is the reason, that he's got. But he still has a 43% approval rating. No matter what he does, he always seems to be between 40 and 45%. He never gets over 50. He's never got over 50. And I don't think any president has ever not got over 50% at some point during their presidency.
I think you're right saying that, Trump is in trouble with suburban women. I think after 4 years, they may just have had enough of his continual anger, rudeness, boastfulness, disrespect of women.
Yeah.
They're all the things that they tell their kids not to be.
Exactly.
And Trump personifies that. And I think there's probably a certain amount of Trump fatigue, and not just amongst suburban women, that Trump has, every time you turn on the TV, he's there, or social media, he's in people's faces 24/7, and you can't escape from it. And I think there's a certain amount of weariness that has taken place. Like, people want to change the channel.
It's just exhausting. And I think Americans just want some kind of normalcy. I mean, it's already exhausting enough to go through a pandemic. But when you've got, the president, saying stand back and stand by to white supremacists, and tweet.
It was pretty horrific.
Putting unleashing a barrage of tweets from the bathroom or whatever at 3 a.m. In all caps. I mean, it's just exhausting. You have to, there's some question, what are the late night comics going to do once Trump is gone? You know, I mean, they'll still have Fox News, right? But like he's an inexhaustible supply of material. And at a certain point, it just is wearying. It is so wearying.
Yes, I for one would certainly welcome a little bit more normality and a little more sanity.
I might actually get some work done instead of having to, you know, read all the New York Times stuff about. There's 5 things every day that come out. Oh, I got to read that. I got to read that. The thing this time is that Trump is a known commodity. He's a completely known commodity. You could say, people could argue that in 2016, he wasn't really a known commodity, right? There was always the possibility that he was going to pivot somehow. There was going to be this pivot towards being presidential. Once he actually won the election, once he got out of the campaign. Americans don't pay attention to politics, except in even a presidential race, until really after Labor Day. And so, yes, there were a number of things that happened after Labor Day, like, for example, the Access Hollywood tape and all of that. But Clinton was so unpopular alongside Trump. And of course, it's very rare for one party to control the White House for more than 8 years before there's a switch. At least it has been in the past. The Republicans did it with Reagan and then George H.W. Bush for 12 years. But before that, when was the last time one party controlled? I think it was FDR, wasn't it? Or Eisenhower. Wait, was it Eisenhower? Controlled the Republicans had
in I think 52. There was a Republican.
52 to 6. Okay, so that was only 8 years then, because Truman. When did Truman? Was he defeated in 52? I mean, or did he get? There's term limits, but yeah, anyway, whatever. 12 years is a very long time for Americans to handle one party in the White House for some reason. Okay, so there was this idea: we need to change. We need to change. Clinton's not popular. We don't really know too much about Trump. He's a good businessman. He's a really successful businessman. That, of course, has turned out to be complete garbage. So let's give him a chance. Right?
Yeah, I think this time, like we all know, what you see is what you get.
Exactly. So things are much more baked in. That's the expression everyone's using. I have to even admit that after I got over my PTSD from Trump's winning that election, I had a small sliver of hope that he might actually be okay, that we could handle this for 4 years, because he might actually, become more presidential, grow into the job, recognize the gravity of the situation. But as Obama said in the, Democratic National Convention, he can't. He didn't because he
can't. Look on the bright side, Daniel. He hasn't nuked anybody yet.
Yes, I know, exactly. Remember Ted Cruz saying we could wake up one morning and find out Donald's nuked Denmark. But
anyway, we shall see. Maybe not on November the 3rd, but as the votes come in, how this is all going to play out, whether we're in for 4 more years of the same, or whether there's going to be a new administration.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we should also look for, as well as it gets closer and closer to the election, how many Republicans will jump ship. So you've got Ben Sasse 2 days ago, lashing out at Trump in this 9-minute or whatever telephone town hall. I mean, that's remarkable. That was picked up by all of the papers, and he didn't try and keep it a secret. Now, he wasn't a never Trumper, really, but he was never really thrilled with Trump.
Well, the more Trump looks like he's going to lose, the more you're going to see some of the congressional rats jumping ship. From the Trump ship.
That's right. So that's something to watch for students. And I just don't see. There's no way that the Republicans win the popular vote. Certainly, there's no way that they win their popular vote. I don't think there's any way they win the Electoral College either, if all the votes actually get counted. At this point. Like you said, Andy, it was about the same thing for Clinton at this time, 3 weeks out from the election or something. But then, of course, we had the October surprise of the Comey saying that they were reopening the investigation into Clinton's emails. It looks like all of the Republicans' attempts to engineer an October surprise have failed.
Well, we still got half of October to go, more or less.
Yeah, I know, but there were a number of things in the works, right? Trump wanted Barr to to launch indictments against major Democrats. That's not happening. It looks like the Durham report, right, to try to debunk the Mueller investigation, there won't be any findings from that until after the election. And the most recent thing is that Rudy Giuliani, has been trying to get some Burisma emails released into the national political bloodstream of the United States, alongside with fake emails, which is how the Russians did it in 2016, and try and discredit Biden that way. But that US intelligence agencies have determined that he's actually involved with a foreign operation. It's the Russians, and they know it's the Russians. And so,
well, we'll see if anything comes out, and I'm pretty much convinced the Democrats are not counting their chickens before they hatch this time.
No, they're not. That's for sure. I don't think any of us is. But as I look at the polls and I look at the numbers and I look at the fact that every time Trump goes on television, he just shoots himself in the foot. He's not capable of a proper debate, right?
If I was a Democrat, I would be more concerned about the legal challenges and the attempt to dispose of the mail-in voting.
And the whole and the poll intimidation at the polls, which is possible because some law that was on the books expired 2 years ago or something, and now that's legal.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually send out people.
Is not allowed to contact voters themselves, but they can ask the electoral officials there to.
Yeah. So this is.
But it is intimidating. I agree. If you have a bunch of goons showing up at polling places, I don't know if there are, even in the Republican Party, if there are enough goons to do that in major in so many polling places.
I heard some. We have Republican friends in New Hampshire, and we don't talk politics with them. They voted for Trump in 2016. When we talked to them in February, they said they were going to vote for him again. We were absolutely appalled and trying to change the subject after about 5 minutes. He wrote to me yesterday and said, "Don't know what's going to happen in a couple of weeks, but I can tell you the ammo stores are empty." Now that's really frightening. That's the thing that everyone's been worried about, is that Trump,
there was a big run on guns when Obama got elected because people thought that he was going to
take them away,
the right to buy them. So
you think that might be it?
Like everything is good for gun stores.
Yeah.
So,
except that there's the New York Attorney General trying to take down the NRA and dissolve it. That's good. Good to see that. Tisha James.
I think we had a really, really good discussion, but we're just going to try to wrap it up. And we actually have one last question. If you could shortly give 3 tips or 3 things that students should pay attention during debate or the election.
Yeah, I would say first off, one of the states to watch on election night would be Florida. It's a key battleground state. Also, they may have their mail-in votes counted reasonably early, and I would think if Trump doesn't win Florida, then it's going to be very difficult for him to trace a path to re-election. So that's one of the things that I would look for. I would also expect that there will be a lot of talk from Republicans about delegitimizing the mail-in ballot process, and I think you're probably going to see some legal action on that in that regard. Couple of things that are also interesting is that, according to recent polls, that much more traditionally Republican states in the Deep South, we're here talking about like Georgia and even perhaps Texas, are more in play this time. I think it would be a bit of a long shot to see Biden winning either Georgia or Texas, but the polling, certainly more in Georgia than more so in Georgia than Texas, is fairly close.
Yeah.
And so that I would think would be interesting if Trump loses Georgia, it's pretty much all over. So, but also there are some Senate races that are going to be close that might be worth also watching, because whoever controls the Senate will have obviously a major advantage then in the appointment of judges, and will have an important role in whether or not President Biden or whoever can get their policies through.
Right.
So,
yeah, the Democrats. Worth watching. I totally agree with all of that. The Democrats are played defense in 2018 on the Senate. This time it's the Republicans playing defense on the Senate. It's been pretty steady in terms of looking at one of the 8 websites that I've been monitoring every now and then, has had the Democrats at 51 in the Senate, as high as 52 in some cases. It never goes below 51. And then the Republicans have whatever, 47, 48, there's ties, 1 or 2 ties. You have to look at particular Senate seats that if the Republicans lose them, then they really have almost no path to keeping the majority. I don't think they will keep the majority in this case. You've got in Maine, for example, Susan Collins is in trouble. You've got Cal Cunningham giving Tom Tillis fits in North Carolina. In South Carolina, you've got Lindsey Graham in some trouble. He's being outspent enormously by Jamie Harrison, who raised $57 million, eclipsing Beto O'Rourke's $38 million or something like that. Anyway, it's ridiculous how much money he's raised for a Senate thing. Even in North Dakota, I think it is. With
there are special elections in a couple of places too. I mean, like Arizona, I think.
Yeah.
Some possibility Democrats could win that. They will almost certainly, I think, lose the seat that they took
Alabama.
in Alabama.
Yeah, that's sad.
By my calculations, it looks as though it will either be a 50-50 Senate, or that the Democrats may win it marginally 51-49.
And all they need is 50-50 if they have the presidency, because of course Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote. Yeah, I would say it's going to be 51-49 or 52-48. About Alabama, that is deeply sad. It can be argued, of course, the only reason Doug Jones won is because Roy Moore was so awful that Republicans just stayed home and they didn't vote. But Doug Jones is such a good man. He's a prosecutor. He prosecuted he put away Klansmen who were responsible for the Birmingham Street church bombing. I think he was part of.
Daniel, the political graveyard is littered with good people.
Oh, I know. And if you look at who he's running against a college football coach, and that's all he's got. That's all Tommy Tuberville is. He's not Roy Jones. He's got no expertise in anything, but he'll probably win.
Do you know how popular college football is in Alabama?
I do know. I went to the University of Michigan. We were co-national champions in 1997. And my dissertation advisor played for Florida State. So I'm very well aware.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very, very sad that Doug Jones is almost going to lose his seat in Alabama. But look at Maine, look at North Dakota, look at South Carolina, North Carolina, Colorado, all of these places, the Democrats have a good chance of pickups. So, the Republicans are playing defense.
We'll keep an eye on it on November the 3rd and see what transpires. And I think we still may be talking about the uncertainty of the result maybe even a week later.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I would like to thank you both on behalf of PISA and the student for that amazing discussion. It was really amazing, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Marie-Pierre, for organizing us.
This was fun. I haven't seen Andy's face in like 7 months.